So some breaking news coming in from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's former president Gotabaya Rajapaksa returns from exile. The 73-year-old leader arrived from Bangkok via Singapore on a commercial flight, ending his 52-day self-imposed exile. Rajapaksa was welcomed by his ministers at the airport. He will be provided with all facilities granted to a former president. This comes after the Lankan leader had to flee the island nation following the massive protest over worst economic crisis. We're joined by my colleague Purnima Murli on the phone. So Purnima, the Rajapaksas were in power for years in Sri Lanka. What is the expectation now from Gotabaya after returning from exile? Will he keep the things quiet and not meddle into the government affairs? And also, why has he come back?
Well, Rajapaksa has come back after he left the country when the entire country raised slogans against him, demanding his resignation. In fact, he's come back because after Thailand, he wanted the other countries were not really open to having him in their respective countries. Therefore, he decided to come back because the protests have now been withdrawn in Sri Lanka. And the new president is now trying all ways to ensure that Sri Lanka slowly recovers. Therefore, now that the protests have also stopped, and there are new teams, new cabinet members who are now trying to ensure that Sri Lanka gets all the money to go forward. He's decided to come back, and also the fact that other countries did not want to support him. We're not really open to welcoming him, which is the reason why he's come back after nearly 7 weeks. However, at the moment, Sri Lanka continues to face its worst ever economic crisis, and protesters are now keenly watching. Remember, in the wee hours, Gotabaya had finally returned from Thailand back to Sri Lanka. We'll now have to see how protesters will now take this forward, and whether they will continue to protest or whether they will allow him to stay in Sri Lanka for the next couple of days. That remains to be seen.
So Purnima, what are the chances of protests again erupting in the island nation as Gotabaya has returned?
At the moment, the protests are not happening. But for the next few days, we'll have to see how people now slowly would react to Gotabaya returning back to his home country, because so far protesters called off their protests after Gotabaya had left, after he resigned, and finally after a new president and a new government was in place, new cabinet ministers were formed. Protesters then decided that it's time for them to give some time to the new team to see what best they could do to ensure that Sri Lanka bounces back. And because of that, protests are called off. Now with Gotabaya once again coming back, what power will he hold? All those remain to be seen. Therefore, protesters are also keenly watching if Gotabaya still has some power in the functioning of the new government, and that remains to be seen. Next 24 to 48 hours will be crucial to know what protesters now plan next, now that he's finally back to Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Purnima.